The North Sea, December 3, 1939, 09:15 hours. 24 Royal Air Force Wellington bombers slice through the freezing morning sky toward Heligoland, Germany's fortified naval base. Inside the formation, Corporal Copley mans the tail guns of Wellington N2879, call sign Z for Zebra, his breath fogging in the unheated turret. Then the German fighters arrive. Lieutenant Günther Specht roars toward the formation in his Messerschmitt Bf 110 heavy fighter, throttle forward, cannon armed. At 25 years old, he already has 2 confirmed kills. Today will be his 3rd. He lines up the Wellington in his gun sight, finger tightening on the trigger. The cannon shells rip into the bomber's fuselage. Metal tears. Smoke trails. The Wellington shudders but keeps flying. Specht presses his attack, closing to killing range. But Copley isn't done. The British tail gunner swings his turret, leading the target, and squeezes his triggers. The burst catches Specht directly in the cockpit. The canopy explodes, glass and metal shred into his face. Blood erupts across the instrument panel. The 25-year-old pilot screams as he feels his left eye destroyed. His face torn open, warm blood flooding down his flight suit. He's going down. The Bf 110 spirals toward the freezing North Sea. Specht, barely conscious, fights the controls with one hand while holding his shattered face with the other. He hits the water hard. The impact nearly kills him. German rescue boats fish him from the wreckage 40 minutes later. The medics take one look and shake their heads. His left eye is gone. His face requires extensive reconstruction. His career as a Luftwaffe pilot is finished before it really began. 6 months of surgery, 6 months of recovery, 6 months of darkness on one side. The medical board's verdict is swift and absolute. Permanently unfit for combat flying duty, depth perception compromised, visual field reduced by 50%. Recommend immediate transfer to ground duties. What they didn't know was this. Günther Specht would return to combat. He would shoot down 34 Allied aircraft, 15 of them 4-engine bombers. He would become one of the most feared formation leaders in the Luftwaffe. And he would prove that losing one eye didn't mean losing the ability to kill. It meant learning to see differently. By December 1939, the air war over the North Sea had become a shooting gallery, but not the way either side expected. The RAF believed their Wellington bombers could strike German naval bases in broad daylight without fighter escort. The heavy bombers carried multiple defensive gun positions. Their self-sealing fuel tanks offered protection. British planners calculated they could absorb acceptable losses while delivering devastating attacks. They were catastrophically wrong. On September 4, 1939, the RAF sent 29 Wellingtons and Blenheims to attack German warships at Wilhelmshaven. 7 aircraft were lost, a staggering 24% casualty rate. On September 29, 11 Hamptons attacked German ships near Heligoland. 5 were shot down, including 2 by Lieutenant Günther Specht of Zerstörer-Geschwader 26, marking his entry into the war with a double victory. On December 14, 12 Wellingtons attempted another daylight raid. 5 were destroyed. The pattern was clear. Unescorted bombers flying predictable routes in daylight were easy prey for German fighters. Yet RAF Bomber Command continued these operations, believing that tighter formations and better gunnery would solve the problem. Each mission resulted in horrific losses. Young British aircrews climbed into their bombers knowing they might not return. German fighter pilots, meanwhile, refined their tactics with each engagement. The December 3rd raid that nearly killed Günther Specht perfectly illustrated the crisis. 24 Wellingtons from RAF Marham and Mildenhall attacked Heligoland. The Germans scrambled multiple fighter units, including Specht's Al-Ar-Gruppe of Zerstörer-Geschwader 26. The formation flew the new Messerschmitt Bf-110 heavy fighter, twin engines, twin crew, heavy cannon armament. It was designed to destroy bombers. Specht intercepted the Wellingtons over open water. He shot one down into the North Sea, his third confirmed victory. But British tail gunner Corporal Copley, cramped in his exposed turret, tracked the attacking fighter and fired a devastating burst. The bullets and cannon shells tore directly into Specht's cockpit, shattering the canopy and destroying his left eye. The standard Luftwaffe medical protocol was absolute. Vision impairment, particularly the loss of binocular vision, permanently disqualified pilots from combat duty. Depth perception, the brain's ability to judge distances using input from both eyes, was considered essential for aerial combat. Without it, doctors argued pilots couldn't accurately judge closure rates, lead angles, or deflection shots. They couldn't land safely. They couldn't dogfight effectively. Adolf Galland, another famous Luftwaffe ace, had managed to continue flying despite severe vision problems from earlier training accidents, but he concealed the extent of his impairment from medical examiners. Most pilots with similar injuries were immediately grounded, assigned to training duties, staff work, or discharged entirely. For 6 months, Günther Specht lay in military hospitals while surgeons reconstructed his face. The left eye was beyond saving. His depth perception was gone. His peripheral vision on the left side vanished. Every combat pilot's nightmare had become his reality. When he finally recovered enough to walk, to function, to think clearly, the medical board convened. The verdict was predetermined. He would never fly combat again. They offered him a staff position, paperwork, planning, logistics, an honorable way to serve despite his disability. Specht refused. Not because he was reckless, not because he didn't understand the limitations, but because during those 6 months of darkness and pain, lying in a hospital bed with half his vision gone, Günther Specht had been thinking, he had been analyzing, he had been solving a problem the doctors didn't even understand. What if losing depth perception wasn't a fatal flaw? What if monocular vision wasn't a disability for a fighter pilot? What if it was an advantage? Günther Specht was born November 13, 1914, in Frankenstein, Lower Silesia, a small Prussian town where nothing particularly remarkable ever happened. He wasn't from a military dynasty, no famous ancestors, no aristocratic connections. His family was solidly middle class, unremarkable, ordinary. Specht himself was physically unremarkable too, short, slight build, a patch of prematurely gray hair above his forehead that made him look older than his years. If you passed him on the street in 1935, you wouldn't look twice. He had no distinguishing characteristics that suggested future greatness. What he did have was energy, relentless, focused energy, and an obsessive attention to detail that bordered on perfectionism. When he joined the Luftwaffe in 1935, he wasn't a natural pilot. He didn't have the instinctive feel for aircraft that some aviators possessed. He earned his wings through grinding determination, studying every manual, analyzing every maneuver, approaching flying like an engineering problem to be solved through precise execution. His instructors noted that he was competent, thorough, disciplined, but not exceptional. By September 1939, Lieutenant Specht was assigned to 3 Staffel of Zerstörer-Geschwader 26, flying the new Bf-110 heavy fighter. Then came the war. Then came his first victories. Then came the Wellington's tail gunner. Then came the darkness. After 6 months of recovery and the medical board's rejection, Specht didn't accept the staff position. Instead, he demanded to see his former commander. He wanted to return to IZG-26, not as a grounded officer, but as their adjutant, a position that would keep him on an operational base, around aircraft, around combat operations. His commanders were skeptical but intrigued. They knew Specht's reputation for meticulous planning and analytical thinking. An adjutant position meant paperwork, coordination, administrative duties. He wouldn't fly combat missions. The compromise seemed reasonable, except Specht had no intention of staying grounded. During those first weeks back at his unit in spring 1940, while officially handling administrative duties, Specht began a series of unauthorized experiments. Late at night, after the day's operations concluded, he would requisition an aircraft for administrative flights or maintenance checks. Alone in the cockpit, with his shattered face still tender from surgery, with darkness covering half his vision, Günther Specht began teaching himself to fly all over again. He discovered something the doctors hadn't considered. With one eye, he couldn't judge depth the traditional way, but he could judge it differently. Movement parallax, the way objects at different distances moved at different speeds relative to each other, gave him spatial information. He could use the rate at which targets grew larger in his gun sight to estimate closure speed. He could develop muscle memory for deflection angles that didn't require binocular vision. Most remarkably, he found that in certain situations, monocular vision actually improved his visual scanning. He developed a technique of moving his head constantly, using motion to compensate for his missing peripheral vision. The constant scanning made him more aware of the battle space than many pilots with two good eyes who relied on natural peripheral vision and missed threats. Within 2 months, Specht was ready. He approached his commander with a proposal that was either brilliant or insane. He wanted to return to combat. May 1940, the German offensive through France and the Low Countries is in full swing. IZG-26 operates from forward airfields, flying intercept missions against Allied fighters and bombers. Personnel are stretched thin, combat losses mount daily, and Hauptmann Günther Specht, officially the Gruppe's adjutant, is about to break every rule in the Luftwaffe manual. On May 23, 1940, British Spitfires engaged German fighters near Calais. IZG-26 scrambles to intercept. As the formation prepares for takeoff, Specht climbs into his Bf-110. His commander spots him, starts to object, but the engines are already running and the enemy is airborne. There's no time for debates. Specht takes off, his first combat mission with one eye. His radio operator in the rear seat watches nervously as they climb toward the battle. The British Spitfires appear, sleek, fast, deadly. This is the moment of truth. Either Specht's self-taught techniques work, or they die. He spots a Spitfire breaking toward a German fighter. Specht banks hard, lining up the shot. In his mind, he's running through the calculations he practiced hundreds of times alone. Closure rate estimated by visual expansion rate. Lead angle calculated by the target's movement across his canopy. Trigger squeeze timed to weapon ballistics. His cannon fire tears into the Spitfire's wing. The British fighter rolls, trailing smoke. Specht follows, adjusting, compensating for his limited vision by aggressive head movement, by positioning his aircraft to maximize his good right eye's field of view. A second burst. The Spitfire goes down in flames. 2 more British fighters fall to Specht's guns that day. 3 confirmed victories in his first mission back. But during the engagement, a British fighter damages his Bf-110. Specht force lands near Boulogne-sur-Mer, badly injured again. His gunner is also wounded. His commander visits him in the field hospital. "That was illegal, Hauptmann. You're medically unfit for combat. You violated direct orders from the medical board. This is grounds for court-martial." Specht, his face bandaged again, looks at his superior with his one good eye. "I shot down 3 Spitfires." "That's irrelevant to..." "Sir, with respect, that's entirely relevant. We're losing pilots every day. I just proved I can still fight." The medical board based their decision on peacetime assumptions. This is war. You need every pilot who can shoot down the enemy. The room falls silent. His commander knows Specht is right. The Luftwaffe is suffering significant losses in the Battle of France. Experienced pilots are invaluable, but allowing a one-eyed pilot to fly combat sets a dangerous precedent. If word reaches higher command, there will be consequences. You're technically still assigned to adjutant duties, his commander finally says. Your administrative flights are not my concern. But if you get yourself killed, I'm ordering an investigation into who authorized your flights. Understood? Specht understands perfectly. It's tacit approval. Permission to continue fighting, hidden behind plausible deniability. Over the next year, while officially serving as Gruppe Adjutant, Hauptmann Günther Specht flies dozens of combat missions. His aircraft sports a unique emblem, a pencil superimposed on his adjutant's chevron, a wry joke about being desk-bound while actually killing enemy aircraft. The one-eyed pilot has found his war. By September 1941, Specht's situation had become impossible to hide. He had accumulated multiple combat victories while officially grounded. His superiors walked a tightrope between utilizing an effective combat pilot and violating Luftwaffe medical regulations. The compromise solution arrived in the form of a new assignment, command of a night fighter training unit. On September 16, 1941, Hauptmann Specht became Staffelkapitän of Zwei Nachtjagdschule 1, a newly formed night fighter training squadron at Ingolstadt-Manching. On October 31st, he was promoted to Commandeur of the 3rd NJS-1, commanding the entire training Gruppe. It was simultaneously a promotion and a bureaucratic maneuver. Give the problematic one-eyed pilot an important position that kept him away from frontline combat. For exactly 1 year, Specht trained night fighter pilots. He was brilliant at it. One of his students was Paul Zorner, who would become one of Germany's most successful night fighter aces with 59 victories. Zorner later remembered Specht as demanding, perfectionist, analytical. He taught us to think like engineers, Zorner recalled. Every intercept was a mathematical problem. Every attack run had optimal parameters. He made us understand why things worked, not just how to do them. But Specht was miserable. While his students flew against the RAF bomber streams at night, while the air war over Europe intensified, while the Luftwaffe bled experienced pilots in brutal attrition, Günther Specht was stuck in Bavaria, teaching others to fight. In late 1942, the situation on the Western Front became critical. The United States 8th Air Force had begun daylight bombing raids on Germany. American B-17 flying fortresses, bristling with defensive guns and flying in tight formations, penetrated deep into German airspace. The Luftwaffe's fighter force struggled to develop effective tactics against these heavily armed bombers. Specht watched the combat reports with growing frustration. He had developed theories about bomber interception during his night fighter training command. He understood formation tactics, optimal attack angles, weapon ballistics. He was wasted in a training role. In January 1943, he submitted a formal request for transfer to an operational fighter unit. The response was immediate and unambiguous. Request denied. Medical status unchanged. Current assignment appropriate to physical limitations. Specht appealed directly to the Jagdwaffe command structure. He provided documentation of his combat victories from 1939-1940. He included testimonials from his former commanders. He outlined his tactical theories for bomber interception. The appeal went nowhere. Then Jagdgeschwader 1, one of the premier fighter wings defending the Reich, suffered heavy losses in February 1943. They needed experienced pilots immediately. Specht's name came up in staff discussions. Some officers objected violently. He's blind in one eye. This is exactly the kind of exception to medical standards that gets people killed. The room erupted in arguments about policy versus pragmatism, but the realities of war trumped medical regulations. On February 26, 1943, Hauptmann Günther Specht flew his first mission with 10 JG-1 against American bombers attacking Wilhelmshaven. He shot down a B-17 Flying Fortress, his first Wehrmacht force-engine kill. 1 month later, on March 27th, he was appointed Staffelkapitän of the newly reformed 7 JG-1. In May 1943, he received command of the Typische Gruppe Jagdgeschwader 11, one of the newly created fighter groups specifically tasked with defending the Reich against American daylight bombers. At 28 years old, with one eye, Günther Specht was now Gruppenkommandeur, leading 60 pilots and 25 fighters in the most crucial air battle of the war. The medical board's concerns were officially overruled by operational necessity. Specht's personnel file now contained a special waiver. Combat effectiveness demonstrates adequate compensation for visual limitations. Medical restriction lifted for duration of emergency. Heinz Knoke, one of Specht's squadron leaders in the 7 JG-11, later wrote in his memoir, "I flew for the Führer," about his new commander. Although he lost his left eye in late 1939, he could see like a vulture. He was an excellent marksman. Specht had an eye for detail, and he wrote detailed mission log reports for future use. The one-eyed pilot wasn't just back in combat. He was leading formations into the most dangerous aerial battlefield in history. If this story of incredible determination against impossible odds is keeping you riveted, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss our deep dives into untold military history. We publish new stories of extraordinary courage every week. Now let's see how Specht's unique vision turned him into a bomber-killing machine. August 17, 1943, 10:20 hours. The American 8th Air Force launches one of the most ambitious operations of the war, a simultaneous strike on the ball-bearing factories at Schweinfurt and the Messerschmitt production facility at Regensburg. 376 B-17 Flying Fortresses, carrying 4,129 crewmen, thunder toward Germany in formations that stretch for miles. The Luftwaffe scrambles every available fighter. Major Günther Specht leads WWII JG-11 from their base at Gilze Rijn in the Netherlands. His Bf 1009 G6 gunboat carries 20mm cannon and 13mm machine guns specifically for bomber destruction. At 11:40 hours near Antwerp, Specht spots the massive formation B-17s of the 381st Bomb Group flying at 25,000 feet, their contrails marking the sky like chalk lines. Standard Luftwaffe doctrine called for immediate attack. But Specht, with his engineer's mind and his careful analytical approach, does something different. He positions his group above and ahead of the bombers, maintaining formation, watching, waiting. His pilots grow anxious. The targets are right there. Why aren't they attacking? Specht watches the American escort fighters, P-47 Thunderbolts, with limited range. At 12:10 hours near Eupen, the escorts reach their fuel limit and turn back toward England. Now the bombers are naked. All aircraft, this is Specht, begin attack sequence. Over the next 30 minutes, the WWII JG-11 systematically destroys the American formation. Specht's technique is devastating in its precision. He approaches from head-on, the classic frontal attack that gives bomber gunners the smallest target and shortest firing window. But his attack angle is calculated with mathematical precision, not quite dead ahead, which forces the attacker to fly through concentrated fire from multiple bomber gun positions. Instead, he angles slightly, targeting individual aircraft in the formation, using his fighter's speed advantage to flash through the defensive fire before the gunners can track effectively. His one eye doesn't handicap him. In the frontal attack, everything happens so fast that depth perception is almost irrelevant. Specht judges distance by the rate at which the bomber grows in his gun sight, a technique that works perfectly with monocular vision. His closure rate exceeds 500 miles per hour. He opens fire at 400 meters, cannon shells walking toward the bomber's cockpit and left wing route. The B-17 Mizpah, serial number 42-24453 of the 91st Bomb Group, explodes. 3 crewmen killed instantly, 7 captured after parachuting. Within that half hour, the formation loses 18 B-17s. Specht personally accounts for 2, his 16th and 17th confirmed victories. The horrific losses of August 17, 1943, forced the 8th Air Force to temporarily suspend deep penetration raids. The Americans called it Black Thursday. The Luftwaffe called it a triumph. Günther Specht's carefully planned and executed attack demonstrated that American bombers could be stopped. On September 11, 1944, Specht led a combined formation, including his own JG-11 headquarters flight and elements of JG-4 on an intercept near Arnhem. The target, 34 B-17s of the legendary Bloody 100th Bomb Group, already famous for their horrific casualty rates. Specht's tactical brilliance positioned his fighters perfectly, attacking from the sun, using altitude advantage to build devastating speed before engaging. Within minutes, 15 of the 34 B-17s were falling from the sky. Hundreds of American airmen, many of them teenagers on their first missions, died in exploding aircraft or bailed out over hostile territory. Specht himself shot down a P-51 Mustang that attempted to defend the bombers. His 32nd confirmed victory. American bomber crews began reporting encounters with German fighters led by an aircraft marked with distinctive insignia, a green spinner and a Knight's Cross painted on the engine cowling. They didn't know the pilot was blind in one eye. They just knew that when that particular Bf-109 led an attack, Americans died. Technical analysis from gun camera footage revealed Specht's unique fighting style. Unlike pilots who relied on deflection shooting and complex lead angles requiring excellent depth perception, Specht preferred pure pursuit attacks, or head-on runs where closure rate and target expansion provided all the distance information he needed. His attack angles were steeper than standard doctrine recommended, compensating for his restricted peripheral vision by positioning targets in his stronger right eye field of view. Surviving American pilots offered their perspectives years later. Staff Sergeant Robert Morgan, a ball turret gunner on a B-17 that survived an attack led by Specht's formation in July 1943, recalled, "These weren't random attacks. This was methodical murder. They knew exactly where to hit us, exactly when to break off, exactly how to avoid our defensive fire. We felt helpless." Lieutenant James Brennan, pilot of Forever Amber from the 381st Bomb Group, survived being shot down by a JG-11 in October 1943. The leader came in from 11 o'clock high, and I swear he flew through our formation, just threaded the needle between 2 aircraft, firing the whole time. I've never seen flying that precise. Then he was gone before we could track him. By April 8, 1944, Specht's tally stood at 30 victories. He received the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross in a ceremony at his base. At the presentation, Specht wore his full dress uniform. His Knight's Cross hung at his throat. His destroyed left eye was covered by his officer's cap, positioned carefully. The citation read, "For exceptional leadership and extraordinary personal courage in aerial combat against numerically superior enemy forces." No mention of his handicap, no reference to the medical waivers, just recognition of lethality. Throughout 1944, as the Allied bombing campaign intensified, and the Luftwaffe's situation became increasingly desperate. Specht continued leading his formations into combat. His command style was distinctive. He led from the front, literally. On every mission where the Tang's JG-11 engaged the enemy, Specht's aircraft was first into the attack. He expected his pilots to follow his example. They did, because they trusted his tactical brilliance and because his survival proved his methods worked. His final combat tally, 34 confirmed aerial victories, 15 four-engine bombers destroyed, all victories achieved on the Western Front. 6 times shot down during his career, and each time he preferred trying to land his damaged aircraft rather than bailing out. Remarkable trust in his ability to judge altitude and distance with one eye. The ending of Günther Specht's story is as dramatic as his rise to ace status. But before we get there, please take a second to like this video. It helps us reach more history enthusiasts like you. And if you're fascinated by stories of combat innovation and tactical genius, check out our video about the fighter pilot who developed the thatch weave. Link in the description. Now, the final chapter. January 1st, 1945. 0808 hours. Operation Bodenplatte. Hitler's last desperate gamble to destroy Allied air power on the ground. Every available Luftwaffe fighter in the West, over 900 aircraft, launches a coordinated surprise attack on Allied airfields in France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. Oberstleutnant Günther Specht, posthumously promoted after his death to lieutenant colonel, leads Jagdgeschwader 1165 fighters against American airfields at Asch and Ophhoven. For this mission, Specht wears his full-dress uniform with all his decorations instead of his flight suit. Paul Zorner, his former student, later speculated, perhaps he knew. Specht flies a Focke-Wulf FW-190A9, factory number 205033, marked Black 4. His formation flies at 400 feet to avoid radar detection. As they approach the target area near Maastricht, Allied anti-aircraft fire erupts. American P-47 Thunderbolts of the 366th Fighter Group scramble. Fierce dogfighting explodes over the frozen Belgian countryside. At approximately 0930 hours, Günther Specht's aircraft takes heavy fire. Multiple sources report his FW-190 trailing smoke, losing altitude. He attempts a forced landing but crashes near Maastricht. The 30-year-old pilot who fought an entire war with one eye dies in the wreckage. Operation Bodenplatte was a catastrophic failure. The Luftwaffe lost 271 fighters and 143 pilots, including Specht and numerous other experienced formation leaders. The losses crippled German air defenses during the final months of the war. Allied aircraft losses were quickly replaced. German losses were irreplaceable. Specht was nominated for the Oak Leaves to his Knight's Cross, but the recommendation was never processed in the chaos of Germany's collapse. Post-war assessment of Günther Specht's career reveals a remarkable truth. His monocular vision didn't merely fail to prevent his success, it fundamentally shaped his tactical innovations. His inability to rely on traditional depth perception forced him to develop alternative methods for judging distance, closure rate, and deflection angles. These methods, documented in his detailed mission reports, influenced Luftwaffe bomber intercept doctrine. Modern military aviation studies cite Specht's case when examining visual requirements for pilots. Current FAA regulations allow monocular pilots to obtain special medical certification after demonstrating competence, partially based on historical cases proving effective compensation is possible. Military aviation medicine still considers binocular vision preferable, but no longer views monocular vision as absolutely disqualifying. Heinz Knoke, who survived the war and became Gruppenkommandeur of the Seguin JG-11, after Specht's death, wrote, "He was one of the best fighter leaders during the war. His loss left a hole in our formation that could not be filled." American bomber crews who survived encounters with Specht's formations never knew the German pilot killing their friends had only one eye. They just knew someone extraordinarily skilled was trying to murder them. Günther Specht never sought fame. He refused interviews. He avoided propaganda opportunities. He simply wanted to fight, despite medical boards declaring him unfit, despite losing half his vision, despite facing the most powerful air force ever assembled. The lesson isn't that disabilities don't matter. The lesson is that limitations can be compensated for, adapted to, even transformed into different approaches that prove equally effective. Sometimes seeing differently means seeing clearly.